Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Pass the Tots podcast. I am your host, Mike Craig. Thank you for joining us. We have today part two, just a fabulous conversation with Julie Jones. I mean, I'm just looking at my notes. I hold it up. Yeah, just so many great insights. If you haven't heard part one, you got to go back. It is well worth your time. There were just some really helpful things, I think, to any food service operator. Julie, just a phenomenal leader, innovator, just done some amazing things at Ohio State Medical Center. And we wanted to continue the conversation. Julie, let's keep going.
All right, sounds
I
good.
put you on the hot seat here. So
Okay.
if I'm coming to the football game, we're gonna have some Diet Coke and we're gonna cheer our hearts out for Ohio
Yes.
State. I step into the hospital and pretty renowned chili there, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's one that predated me. I think this recipe and we make it in 100-gallon batches and everybody it's got a lot of meat in it apparently, and that's why we could never change the recipe. But it's really one of the things we became known for. And they could our chefs who made it in 100-gallon kettles, they could actually, I used to have a picture where they made it entirely to the top, right? So that they didn't leave any space at the top. So they were just like masters at it. And, but yeah, it's one that, certainly I would hear probably one of the most things about. And we got to do a whole lot of other really cool items too, and sort of our plant forward restaurant
Yeah.
and some of our other ideas. But that's probably one over 30 years there that I heard a lot about.
Delicious. It's making me hungry right here. So
Mhm.
I'll just do a better job to maybe summarize our conversation in part one. We talked a little bit about, innovation and mindset, and you hinted that, not hinted, you discussed how, look, you got to be really good at recognizing change and maybe failure, but just things need to be done differently. But at the same time, you also have to be a change agent. You can't just point out all the things that are wrong. You gotta get going there. And so getting everyone, on the same page and the same risk and the same tolerance for innovation is important. You did that by telling lots of stories. And you would share the wins. They weren't just your wins, but you would include the team, pictures of the team, and really make it an inclusive environment so that everyone felt like those innovations and those wins were theirs. And you probably did that because you put together concrete plans with people and operations, technology plans, finance plans, facilities plans. And just everyone was brought to the table, and you did that. You talked about some of the pivotal moments. I think in your career, one pivotal moment was early on. You had a stretch assignment that pushed you to technology, and that really kind of shaped your appetite for innovation, understanding how technology works, and really wanting to deliver great guest experience has made you and makes anyone a great decision maker. And so with that, uh, you know, 30 plus years leading teams at Ohio State, uh, phenomenal. So if you haven't heard part one, get there, listen to it, digest it. Julie's fantastic. I'd like to transition now and talk a little bit about leadership and, how, I guess the question, just to get right into it, is, how do you identify as a leader what your teams need, and how do you deliver that?
As you think through these kind of questions, I'd like to think about them in a couple of different ways. That your team should evolve and be shaped over time based upon what's going on in the organization. And I sort of see three different levels. Sometimes you need that startup mode. You have a new idea. You need to build it. So you need those leaders who have this confidence, this vision, grit, this adaptability. They can activate and sell an idea, right? So
Yeah.
that's good. So that's sort of that startup. So when do
Startup
you need
mode.
that? Yeah, and then I think you also, and which is very common, which is where a lot of healthcare is, right? You're in an implementation mode, you're in day-to-day execution, or perhaps you're in a turnaround mode. Maybe you're coming into an operation where you have to get better at that. So people who do that well typically are process thinkers, right? Systems thinkers. They have a strong people focus, right? But they can focus on execution. And so they first, if they are in a turnaround or even when they're beginning a new process, it's really about accountability and culture, getting things set right. But I think this is the hardest phase to get into. It's really what I'll call that maturation and evolution, where you're already operating pretty well. But then you need to figure out what's next, because as I said in the prior one, that Woody Hayes quote, "You're either getting better or you're getting worse, right? Nothing ever stays the same." And I think it's hard when you're operating what you believe is at your peak to say, "I need to continue to reinvent ourselves." And I think that's finding that team who's in that space so that you can embrace learning, right? You embrace innovation. It's this growth mindset. And then you, as the leader, leading those leaders in the team, have to really make an investment in people and that learning.
And as a consultant, as you take on projects and you're around the country, is that something you look at right out of the gate? Is kind of what level,
Mm-hmm.
what stage is this team at, and how well are they executing in that stage, and how do we help them kind of graduate to those next stages?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think those are the things when you go in, as an outside observer, that you need to say, well, what is it that they need right now? And it's all based upon what the organization priorities are for them, right?
Yeah.
And I sometimes think we can lose sight of that. But if their primary target is to X, to let's say improve the patient satisfaction experience, it's going back and figuring out what limits that, and then figuring out, where are they at in that process, or they want to advance into community nutrition, and how might they need, they're a functioning team. So I think it's trying to figure out what those skill sets are, and what will get them there.
And
I think, oh, go ahead.
in your experience, how cognizant, how aware are food service directors and leaders of teams? Um, how aware are they of the stages that they're in? Do you think they can point it out and they articulate it, or do you sometimes find people, hey, I'm a leader that's going to be really strong in the startup mode, but they're in a team that's maybe demanding and requiring more implementation and process people focused work?
I think today what it has really changed is the rate of change in organizations. And so often you're just focused on today, right? And trying to get through it. So sometimes that means you don't have the time to pause and really think through that, or really think through how does our leadership model support where we need to go, and how do our skills align with what we need to be able to do, and do I have people sort of sitting in the right seats to do that. So I think sometimes that's what we try to do, obviously, when we go in and say, okay, I can see that. And sometimes that implementation is just helping them with some resources that they may not have time to do. That's certainly how we used it at Ohio State. Say, I don't have time for this. Can you help us gather that information? So I think it's that slow down and that pause to really think about, make the connection to the organization priorities, and how am I aligned with some of the skills. I think too often we focus too heavily on the technical skills. Well, this person knows cash management, or they've worked in a retail operation. But sometimes what you need are those more, the people, the softer people skills. It could be leadership courage. It could be, emotional intelligence, that will escalate that team farther than accountability alone will. So.
Okay, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. I'm just going to ask the question. We were thrust into a pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
We're coming out of it. To some extent, you could say the world in food service was just kind of, whether or not you like it, you're all in startup mode. You're going to have to figure this out. And as we come out of the pandemic, we did our best, and lots of great things happened during the pandemic. As we come out of it, we're faced with, a supply chain issues, labor shortages, and that throws into disarray this idea. If you're at you're coming out of startup mode, and now we're trying to get people and process focused, but we're facing these challenges. What can be done? What's a leader to do?
What's a leader to do? I think what's really hard, it's the perfect time for innovation, right? But unfortunately, what happens, and I'm going to use a term, an efficiency mindset, right, versus an innovation mindset, and how you build that within your team, that capability. In the 1990s, I'll go way back. So there's something called diagnosis-related groups that were introduced by Medicare in the 1980s, which played havoc with hospitals in the 1990s because it changed how they got paid. And so many hospitals went through what I will call very much, I got to cut costs, got to cut costs, got to cut costs. So that that's an efficiency mindset. So same thing happened, I think, in the pandemic and all of those all those challenges you've described. It focuses all your attention inward, right? So maybe what's going to be easiest for us, or this is what I can do. This is so you a little bit lose touch with some of that external thinking. And what I know, and it's going to be an evolution over time, is that it took us probably 3 to 5 years to get out of that mindset and start to think about how can we do things different. Because sometimes the things you were tasked with were so immense. And, I'm so impressed with what the food service world did during the pandemic, but they almost need a little bit of time to recover. But right, they need a lot of time to recover. But they need to sort of recognize that, how do I get beyond just looking at today and moving beyond that? And it's something I experienced in my career, so that's why I feel like it's good to mention, because I have seen it and I know how it was. So it starts in small pieces where you think, well, what if instead of what is? And I think those kind of things can help you through that. But then it's just trying to find some concrete example that could be a small win, and looking outside the industry to see that and how it's being done. And there's certainly a lot of things that you see in the trade publications that talk about that.
Right. So I'm just trying to recap, make sure I got this right. I had kind of suggested that the pandemic pushed everyone towards startup mode, where we're figuring out new ways to operate, deliver our services, doing it on limited budgets with, who knows what kind of labor help we have. And that is the startup mode. In addition, you kind of added on, the pandemic pushed a lot of food service operators to this efficiency where, we're trying to look inward and make changes and cuts, or the innovations, right? That's probably what we could call it. But it was all aimed at efficiency. And even to today, maybe to this point, we're still kind of there. And in your experience, it takes a few years to kind of go from that inward mindset to maybe that innovation that is external.
Yes,
I got that right.
I would agree. And then, there were very cool things that were done during the pandemic that people said would never be possible. But I do think it'll be interesting to see how that evolves.
So how does, if I'm leading a team, I've got a great organization and I'm trying to help kind of bridge that gap as soon as I can, maybe take it from 3 years to a year and a half. How do I do that? I'm a people leader.
Okay. I think is to recognize that everyone's different, right? And not have a standard approach. I say something, value people for who they are, not necessarily who they aren't, or fitting them into some specific mold that you think is the best one. And I think when you start to do that, I think you recognize the strengths that everybody will have and what they can do, and to appreciate that this person's going to be able to do this, something that I could never do. So that hiring for diversity, I think, has become even more important. You hear a lot about that, but I think when you hire for diversity, that value people for who they are becomes even more important. I think one of the examples that I could probably use in my career when I think this sort of came full circle was, at Ohio State, we had a very strong RD leadership model in our management oversight, right? We hired our first chef, I think, in 1991, but we really didn't hire any more till probably 2010 or 11, something like that. But our new model required us to be a culinary centric model, right? So we had to do that. So at that point in time, from 2012 to probably 2015, we hired 40 chefs, culinary trained chefs. And so we also probably had those 55 dietitians between our nutrition management team and our clinical team. But there's something that's very different. So, there's something called the chaotic path, right? So that's the line between chaos and order. And that's a very good description of what happens between dietitians and chefs, right?
Yeah,
so dietitians, we like structure, right? And the chefs like that creativity to work. But, what I came to appreciate is we had to find that sweet spot, right? And valuing people for who they are, instead of trying to make a chef a dietitian and a dietitian a chef, which we also have many of both, right? But is that would allow us to get better and then to appreciate that. So that when we found that sweet spot, that have helped us avoid that rigidity and control that dietitians might move in, or to the chaos on the other side. So I think it's that tolerance and appreciation of people and the tolerance for differing work styles. I think it'll become even more important in the
That's
future.
fantastic. In my mind, I mean, I just got this 40 chefs over a few years starting in 2010.
Oh yeah.
You were already strong. The culture was heavy with an RD management,
Okay.
50
Mhm.
registered dietitians. In my mind, I just see the Hunger Games where you bring all the chefs together
Yes.
and all the
Yeah.
RDs, and you're like, all right, let's develop some menus and
Yeah.
just watch it all play out.
But when you can harness it, and that's what we did, is I think we harnessed it, and I think we found the sweet spot a lot. Not without some chaotic path from time to
Sure.
time, but it was all good.
There's good. I mean, friction can be a really good thing as you
Mm-hmm.
innovate and
Mm-hmm.
build new things, build things of substance and things that will last. So yeah, I mean, I guess around this, I really want to ask a question. What was the impetus from going, to a culinary centric model? I mean, you had noticed changes, but to make the investment, I mean, you basically went about 20 years with one chef and then turned it on a dime and really pushed it forward. And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, tell me more about that.
Well, I think that's because what the outside world had done, right? So we had to do that, and I think to remain competitive and relevant, but we had to sell our story to the culinary world, why it would be a good place to work. And our culinary director at the time, he did a lot of things to partner with local programs, so that we could be part of that. But I think it also helped us decentralize more. So our model was moving decentralized. So we needed to be able to have talent that was decentralized. It maybe wasn't as important when we were in a centralized because we had a lot more direct oversight. But when you went to as many places as we did, that was not going to be the case. So
Wow.
that was one of the reasons. And then the way that we accomplished it was through some partnerships. And they did some amazing things with culinary competitions and things to grow their skills. And I remember them cooking on they had to build a fire and cook on a fire outside. At one of them, I was like, I couldn't have done anything because I wouldn't have known how to start the fire. So,
You mentioned the word decentralized, and I think immediately kind of trust and ensuring
mm-hmm.
that you got the right teams put together.
Yeah.
How did you put a team and make sure that people were in the right seats?
I think it really, as leaders, you really have to evaluate people and talk to people, what's important to them, and really observe where they thrive and what they're really good at. And I think leadership, organizational structures will always evolve over time. They will change based upon what needs to happen at whatever time. So we found ourselves really trying to think, this is what we need in the next 1 to 3 years. Who are the best team members to get us to that point? And so I think that's one of them. It's really identifying, when do we need the startup? When do we need implementation? And potentially when do we need that mature and evolve? And then what we'd like to be able to think we could do is we moved sort of everyone into that mature and evolve so that we all got better, maybe at innovation. But I think it's really also to mentor, sponsor, advocate for the team so they get comfortable with that and really find places where they can thrive.
You had mentioned in the first episode the StrengthsFinder as a way to kind of identify
Mm-hmm.
personality and team
Mm-hmm.
potential team building. Did you do
Mm-hmm.
anything like that with your teams to help them
Yeah, we
identify?
absolutely did.
Yeah.
So yes, so we did I think our full 34 for all of our senior management team. And I think it was really eye-opening. And, because it helps us learn about other people. So like I myself, if you look at their domains are executing, they're influencing, their relationship building, and then thinking. 3 of my top 5 are in executing. I need to get to an outcome, right? So helped me get there, right? But then others on our team, as I said, we had 3 activators on our team in our top 10, and they activated a lot of ideas. But then we had a lot of people with some really strong strengths around sort of the structure. My number 34 one, the one I'm the worst at, is consistency, right? Don't ever put me in charge of rules or regulation. But when you're in healthcare, there's a lot of rules and regulations. There were a lot of people on our team that were very good with that. So making sure that you have that covered. One thing we didn't quite cover as our team, we apparently had little focus. So probably
great.
typical for food service.
Going a million miles a minute.
Yeah.
So and we'll probably put the link to the show notes, but I think the StrengthsFinder, one of the things that I appreciate most is it's not so much trying to tell you maybe areas that you're not as proficient, but it says, here are your strengths. And, as a leader of a team, if you understand the strengths of an individual, what you can do to double down and extract the most value and put your individuals in positions where they can really lead out and do great things for you.
Absolutely. It was our culinary nutrition program was a really good example of that. So one of our chefs, that was his passion, and he was high ideation, high connectedness. So he was able to go out, tell the story. I mean, there's now the James Garden for Life that started off with an idea where he partnered with the College of Agriculture and now is an NIH funded research garden. And so started with an idea with somebody who was really good at that. And then he just embedded well with our Columbus local community, et cetera, but because that's where his strengths were.
One of the cool things is that this adage that opposites attract. And if you've got, historically strong R&D management, so there's process, there's rigidity, there's execution and being in the details, awesome stuff. And then you are evolving into a more culinary centric world and bringing on chefs. I think there's probably some synergy where you're matching up, and it sounds, I joke about it, it's the Hunger Games, but there's actually probably some brilliance to it. Just being able to draw on the values and the expertise from both sides to elevate the overall product and operation.
I absolutely would agree. So that, it's that, how do you take that an idea from an idea to implementation? And it takes it takes a village, so to speak, to do some of the things that we did, but everybody sort of had some of their unique roles that they could serve and get us closer to that. And the ability, I remember one day when we were doing our room service, this setup kitchen, and we had seen it on paper, and those of us who've been heavily involved, we were so committed. The ideation person said, we're building it. So he had cardboard. They had all of these things. Let's prototype it. What's it going to look like? But helped us see the other side, right? So.
Well, and I'm just thinking here. So you said there was a stage, I think it was early 2010s, you were doing 2 million meals. 2 million meals. It was a year, 2 million meals a year. And then you jumped over, just a few years up to 4 million meals a year. So you basically doubled in what you were delivering in that experience, which is great. Your teams probably also grew phenomenally. What did that look like over that time period?
The one thing I will say is, you always have to sort of build your leadership pipeline. At the time I retired in 2018, our senior leadership team, we had an average tenure of 16 years, right? Wow. In the organization. So I think some of that you invest in time. And so you get to some of those outcomes because of that. But I think all of our team, our model at Ohio State is we frequently changed our location in the duties and roles that you served, right? So that you might have been on our patient services, but guess what? You might have moved to the retail area, or you might have been on our central campus and you moved to our East Campus. But we did a lot of that. I think that made us better at the end of the day because everybody had a better appreciation. All of a sudden, we built more capability and capacity in our team. And I think that's what it's about. And so it also helped us eliminate some silos. And I think I learned from that early in my career because we've always done it. And at one point, I ended up overseeing our purchasing and stores, maybe clinical nutrition, but I didn't really have direct operations. And you know what was really easy for me to say? Well, you should just do this, or you should do this. How hard is that? And, I need, I found out I needed to be in operations, but I think it helps you get perspective and become a better teammate when you've experienced that and now have something, that you have as a point of reference.
And the question I have is, if you're, I think it's brilliant. You're building muscle. There was a great leadership pipeline, and as you changed responsibilities frequently and often, how did you, build the confidence? It seems like you were consistently putting people in new areas, stretch opportunities for them.
Hmm.
But how did you help build their confidence? Because if they're regularly stepping into something that maybe they're a little unsure of, what did that look like?
I think there had to be a lot of trust, that people had to trust that I could see something that maybe they didn't see in themselves, or and I'd like to think I wanted to support the whole person, not just a means to an end.
Mhm.
And I think we tried to do that well, and we had lots of conversations. And so, typical for me is I would try to meet with everybody who reported to me at least once a month. We had a pretty standard agenda. There was part of it that there were always growth and development. Where do you want to be? What do you want to do? As part of our performance evaluation process at Ohio State, we had some goals, things to develop, things to leverage. So I always say two things you rocked out of the park so that you can contribute to others, and then two things you want to work on. And sometimes that became areas, and then but we would have ongoing conversations. So it wasn't like one day. I like to think I didn't do that, but oh yeah, by the way, you're going over here effective this date. I think we tried to work through those where it made sense, and understand that it was part of a journey that we had to go through to handle the kind of change we had in a
And
period
you,
of
as
time.
their leader, I'm curious, as their leader, as you met regularly with individuals, two things you rocked, two things you'd like to work on. Were there themes that you were able to extract consistently? What people felt like
Mm-hmm.
they were doing well, and also what they wanted to learn.
And it typically, by the way, was tied to their strengths, the things they
Really?
rocked out. Yeah. So for me, as part of a leader, it's not just that you do it well, but that you bring others along, right? And help them with that. You may partner with them on one of their stretch assignments because you do it well. So that ability to contribute back and make a difference for others, I think, became part of that conversation. We try to link them back. And I'll be really honest, the things they want to develop, sometimes they were technical skills. I don't know how to do cash, or let me understand finance. So a lot of who develop tended to be more technical, unless there was, some issue that we identified through a performance review that we really need to work on, which might just be a
Sure.
general leadership skill. But
I mean, so if they're pushing towards technical areas, I mean, you increase technical acumen with
mhm,
guest expectations. That's when you get
yeah,
really good decision makers.
yeah,
Well, that's
for
fantastic.
sure. Mhm.
I can't imagine everyone was really eager and opportunistic if their strengths were here, or they felt like they were an operations person to maybe change seats. How did you get them bought into this idea of constant, steady change?
It becomes part of your culture, by the way. And a lot of times they could weigh in, what's going to be important to you. So we would often throw that out. What would you like to do? Where would you like to see them, where that happens? And I would always say, I'm going to reserve the right potentially, but help me understand what's important to you and how do you develop. So that's one thing. And it will also go back to trust. They had to trust me personally if I was having that conversation. But I think it also to tell the why, and what they do that no one else can do. And so typically it was trying to help them get to a better position for that time where we needed them to be.
That's awesome. I did you notice that over time, as you were leading and building these teams, you're innovating and just doing all sorts of incredible things, execution of
Mhm.
your operation. Did you recognize that maybe you were building some resilience within the group, that this team could tackle anything and do it well? And
Absolutely. I tell people all the time, I got the privilege of working with what I believe was one of the most talented teams, right? They were amazing. And there's a couple of reasons. When I retired, they said, go back and look at, sort of the numbers, so to speak. 65% of our leaders or administrative team were promoted from within. So fairly high. So it didn't, we were always weren't thinking we were going to find it outside. So we built that inside. I think the other thing that was really, I don't know how to, it was important to consider was we practiced, right? If you think about sports teams practice every day, I do think teams have to practice. So we practiced through special events, through some of these ongoing requests that we would get. And that allowed us to say, okay, let's hone our muscle of working with each other. And we did some really, I think, really cool things, from tough ones, right? We had every kind of water problem known to man, where our team, we would rally. There's something said, it's not your fault, but it is your problem. And water becomes that way in healthcare. We weren't the people that were supposed to provide water everywhere, but we became the people who could do it because we had it, and we had distribution models and all of those kinds of things. So we became a valued resource, right? Value proposition. But then we also got to do the fun ones, right? Whether it's May the Fourth be with you. As a non-Star Wars fan, I mean, we had characters out there, and they did like a few thousand pictures every day, whether from patients or staff members. Harry Potter Day, first day of X, Y, or Z. But that allowed us to practice as a team and get used to working with each other. But that allowed us to do other things for the organization. So we created our value proposition really around three sort of primary things. We wanted to solve problems, we wanted to give back, and we wanted to create experiences. And that helped us make decisions. And then our team really directly sort of impacted those three things. So that improved our reputation in the organization, once again, becoming people that others want to work with.
That's great.
And so we got to do some fun things. But when we started 20 years ago, I remember we did the birthday of Elvis or something like that. And so we had somebody in an Elvis costume passing out jelly donuts. And there was a physician who stopped one of our chef at the time. And she said, this is a hospital. This is a serious place. So it's evolved over time, and we came to appreciate that energy and that excitement that we could bring to the organization was a very positive thing. So
how fantastic is that? So, we talk a lot about innovation and change and leadership development, as if it's just a beautiful ride that you just sign up for. But there's definitely tough times. Would you say, how do you get teams through tough times? Is it just making sure you're never taking yourself too seriously?
Yeah, I think it's appreciation that never ever goes away. I think it's really about being authentic and transparent. That you have to really, sometimes there are some very brutal conversations, but this is where we're at, and this is what I'm hearing, and this is what it may mean. But I think as the leader of a large team, you sometimes have to be the person to adapt, right? Or many times, most times, I would say I would be the person to adapt on some things. That means you take on roles, right? Some tough tasks that may help others complete theirs, right? Or help them through some rough spots. Or what can I do to help you today? How can I support you? What do you need from me? Too often it may go the other way around. So I think it's just trying to figure out how can you support your team during this time, and what do they need from you to do that?
Yeah, that's great. I want to just circle back. You said some great things here. And just to summarize, it's starting in 2011, 2010, 2011, you just went through some massive renovations and innovations. It's just great. I'm guessing at that point that your team was at that maturation level. How did you lead teams if you're at that maturation level to get into startup mode and implementation mode? It's a great concept of how you've put that together. And I'm just curious, in the context of that time period, how you help teams know, it's time to double down on being a startup with, this new cancer tower that we're starting here. We've got this new plant forward thing here that we're going to be doing. How did you do that as a leader?
I think it really came down to sometimes it was through assignment, right? I know that what we need right now is we need to be able to activate this idea and who's going to be best to activate this idea. The other thing that you sometimes have to be able to do is do what I'll call shared accountability, right? You may have the primary oversight for X, Y, or Z, but this project, because of a need, make somebody else, it's not that you exclude them, they're absolutely included in the process, but they become a partner to help make that successful. So I can think of a couple of situations where we did that, and sometimes had to move some things around because people got too much on their plate, not enough on their plate, or who had the capacity to take on more or who wanted to take on more. So I think that's probably how we did it, but it was frequently tied to strengths and what we had to accomplish. And once again, that's why I go back to, I think all food service teams have to have some of that activation skill on it. It tends to be fairly lower in healthcare in the strengths. We are heavy executors and we have phenomenal people skills, right?
Yeah.
So trying to find people who can do that activation and influence and get others on board, those are great people to have on your team.
Well, that is wonderful. As we kind of wrap up, Julie, just a few more questions here. What are the skill sets for a leader in the future of hospitality and food service? As you see the future evolving, what advice, what should we be working on and developing to make us our best in the future?
People skills, certainly those soft skills, that ability to inspire people to a vision and getting people on board. And I think that's becoming harder and harder because of how much people interface we've lost, right, through technology, right? So it's trying to find how we get that and how people can make that their most powerful presence known. So I think that is one. Digital fluency, to me, absolutely. I think everybody will need to have that. I think there is this process thinking and systems thinking as well that will continue to be very important. Understanding how things might need to move through something, because once you understand that core, I think it becomes easier to make decisions about how you can innovate. But I also think, bar none, is people have to be learners. They have to be curious. They have to actively invest in themselves. And I'll say at least 10% of your week needs to be spent in learning. And it's not reading a book. It could be, I'm going to a restaurant and let me see what they're doing on a menu. It could be that I'm calling a peer in another organization to learn how they do something. And the more that people actively invest in that learning, I think they'll be better and become curious, because it's too easy, to say, this is how I've done it. And I know that this works. And I'm a baby boomer, and I will give you an opinion at the end of the day, like no one. But that hurts you, right? Yeah, that hurts us at the end of the day. And because our half-life of our knowledge today is so much shorter. I started a career before computers, before voicemail, before email, right? It was done on a typewriter. So things happen slower. Won't be that way anymore. So that adaptability and that ability to evolve, that would be my crystal ball. And what
I would say, the things that make you an excellent leader, operator in the food service space today, it just has, those things have a short shelf life. Mm-hmm. The expiration date is there, it's coming, and the things that we will need to be successful tomorrow into the future, we just need to keep pushing and keep developing, and that's a growth mindset, knowing that mm-hmm. that we're going to have to get there, that the things of today aren't going to be there tomorrow. We're going to have to keep evolving. Mm-hmm. When you see in your kind of perfect world of the future, where would you like to see food service go in the next few years?
Generally, or specific to healthcare food service?
Let's talk specific to healthcare.
Let's start with that one first. Yeah. I think for healthcare, I'll say maybe where they need to go, or what's going to, I think, be some of the biggest impacts is the changing models. So that, we'll all rush to get room service. Well, we all rush to do all of these things. We're going to have to figure out how to deliver in very non-traditional ways, whether it's a micro hospital that's now 30 miles away or 50 miles away, or whether it's a hospital at home. What kind of support do we need to provide for patients being treated in their own home, so to speak. How do we start to navigate all of these different healthcare models that are in place and make it make sense? And I think that's going to require some different shifts in how we think about it. That customer experience, baby boomers have a different set of expectations as we now start to inundate the healthcare system than the generation ahead of us, who accepted a lot. This is perfectly acceptable. Now we don't live our lives that way. So I think that's going to add significant stress. However, you have to figure out how to do it economically in ways that your organizations can support, because healthcare reimbursement is basically a flat to reducing model, right? So, it's, you got to figure out how to provide that at a cost that makes sense for your organization. So I think there's that. And then in healthcare food services, the concept of the medically tailored meal. How can we make an impact for our patients in our communities, and putting nutrition at the intersection, right, of food and nutrition, right? So
yeah. So what I got there is that models are changing, delivering in very non-traditional ways.
Mm-hmm.
Basically is code for it's a new future,
new world. Mm-hmm.
new world, and figuring out how do we blend all these models cohesively so that it makes sense. And that is, I mean, that challenge that you see today was the one that you faced in 2011, that you'd seen previously as you had stretch assignments.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost it's a never-ending cycle of
Yes.
innovation and operational kind of models that will keep evolving.
I would agree. And that's what I think makes food service fun. There's no day that's ever the same. And but you just have to allocate some time to think, what will be good next week, next year, in 2 years, and that gives you some ideas on how you can be better.
Fantastic. Well, Julie, what a great conversation. Parts 1 and 2, fantastic. To our listeners, we warmly encourage you to start over, to listen, to bookmark, to keep these things. We'll put some of the links and notes in our show notes for everyone. Julie, if anyone wants to reach out to you, is it okay if we link to some of your contact information? I'm sure there's questions that I missed and concepts that others may want to double down and get your expertise on. Thank you so much for today. What a great conversation. My last question is just going to be a fun one. Were there any Halloween traditions that your team had?
Halloween traditions.
No.
Every holiday had some sort of transition, so that, certainly in our retail cafes, we would have some things. Other than, we always had candy all the time, those little miniature candy bars. And
oh yeah.
They used to be, and so we bought the big box, right? And so one of our associate directors used to have them in his office. He's like, I can't, I eat all the crackle bars, I'm gaining weight. So they ended up in my office. And I said, well, I need something to put them in. So I literally got this jar that was enormous. And so people would come into my office and think it was me that had all of this chocolate binge, but everybody would come in and get the chocolate from there. So I would say candy would probably be one. And we were huge candy eaters. So everybody had a favorite, and you had to know what everybody's favorite was. Yes.
Awesome. It's the small things, right, that just build the camaraderie and the culture.
Right.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you, Julie Jones.
Oh, thanks so much for having me. I've truly enjoyed it.
Likewise. To everyone else, I hope you had a great time listening, being part of your week. Come back again, pass the Tots. We look forward to our next conversation. Thank you.
Go Bucks.
Go Bucks.